What's up, everyone? Charles Smith here at you with my 5 favorite books. Now, these books I didn't put in any particular order, and I know that may sound like a cop-out, but the reason they're not in a particular order is because each of them affected me in a different way. But ultimately, if I was going to be stuck on a deserted island for a very long time, these are the 5 books that I would take with me. So if you're ready, let's check them out. Bang! A Confederacy of Dunces. Have you ever heard of it? Who's ever heard of that book? I picked it up and it hooked me from the very first line. A green hunting cap squeezed the top of the fleshy balloon of a head. The green ear flaps, full of large ears and uncut hair, and the fine bristles that grew in the ears themselves, stuck out on either side like turn signals indicating 2 directions at once. Full, pursed lips protruded beneath the bushy black mustache and, at their corners, sank into little folds filled with disapproval and potato chip crumbs. That's the first paragraph. And from there, we get to learn about the great Ignatius J. Reilly. First of all, it takes place in New Orleans, and I always love a good book set in a very unique city, and New Orleans is another character in the book, and I always love that. I love to see cities as characters. So what I can tell you is this. Ignatius J. Reilly is the primary character. He's got a mother. His mother's a bit of a lush. She's crashed their car, and that put them into a little bit of a predicament that makes Ignatius need to get a job so he can pay for the car that she got into an accident. Well, Ignatius is not one for work, and he makes that point very clear, and he proves why he shouldn't be working as the book goes on. Now, he has a long-lost love, Miss Myrna Minkoff, who is in New York City while Ignatius is still in New Orleans, and he speaks of her all of the time. We have a few other characters that dart in and out, but mainly the purpose that they all serve is to show this quirky character existing in a quirky place, creating this quirky story. I was blown away because Ignatius J. Reilly was a real life breathing person to me. The words that came out of his mouth, the reactions that people had to him, the way his clothes were described, the way all of the characters were described. It was something that me as a writer, it really spoke to me because at that point I think most of the things that I was writing about in terms of writing fiction and characters, they were just that. They were characters. They were caricatures. They didn't feel like real people. They didn't have that other layer of dimension that you normally get. Now, one of the kind of sad bummer things about this book is not so much about the book, but the author. The moment that I was done with it, I wanted to read more. I'm like, I never heard of this guy. I would love to read more of his work. Unfortunately, he committed suicide, and the book was actually released posthumously, and I was sad because it was just another reminder that often the lights that burn the brightest often burn the shortest. Let's see what we got. Boom. Native Son, an English class classic. Native Son is not an easy book to read, not just because of the subject matter, but there's a grimness that hangs over the main character, Bigger Thomas. The first thing that I thought of when I heard it is bigger rhymes with, yeah, you know. And I wondered if that's what Richard Wright was thinking when he wrote it, because if I thought that, I'm sure I'm not the only person to think that. From the beginning of the book, when that alarm clock rings, bang! And from that moment and seeing the squalor that he and his family are raised in and living in, it paints this grimness. This is at a time when black people weren't even supposed to look at white people in the eyes. If you saw a white person on the side of your street and they're walking towards you, you had to walk to the other side of the street. You know, it was that kind of racism at the time where basically black people were supposed to know their place. At the heart of Native Son is the death of Mary Dalton, and that's the scene that I'm going to read for you right here. This is the heart that drives the whole book. Her bosom was not moving. He could not hear her breath coming and going now as he had when he had first brought her into the room. He bent and moved her head with his hand and found that she was relaxed and limp. He snatched his hand away. Thought and feeling were balked in him. There was something he was trying to tell himself desperately, but could not. Then, convulsively, he sucked his breath in, and huge words formed slowly, ringing in his ears. She's dead. That scene sets up the rest of the book, and it shows that one decision made by one person at one time changed his life forever. What got me the most about this was there's no happy ending. The writing was so very immediate. It put you in the situation. The dialogue between the characters did not feel fake. It felt very real. It felt very authentic, not only for the time, but for them towards each other. And to be able to see Bigger talk with his family one way, talk with his employer another way, talk with people he worked with even still another way, and talk with his friends another way, that's something that as a writer is very difficult to do, because we all do it. We talk with different people in different ways, but at the same time, we're still ourselves. And that's one of the reasons I love Native Son. It's a book that you can read over the course of your lifetime, and every time you do, you'll take away something different out of it. That, to me, is a great book. So what else we got? Boom! Did that one surprise you? The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. I love this book. Some people kind of say, oh, okay, I get it. And some people are very surprised. The ones that are usually surprised are surprised because of the use of that word a whole lot of times in the book. You know the word that I'm talking about. So I got introduced to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn when I was in high school. And again, it was one of these books that I wasn't into because that's kind of how high school is. So this was a book that I came to later on. So where do we begin? Oh, Huck, where do we begin? So let's start with that word. Terrible word, I know. Now this isn't a word that I use myself, but Mark Twain did, and he used it a lot. Now I hate that word, but it appears in the book 160 times. And the reason is simply because that was the vernacular that was used back then. This was Missouri, the late 1800s. That's how black people were described. What really irritates me is when people want to change it to slave or something else. That word is reflective of the time period and reminds you of how things were back in that time period. As a writer, one of the big things that I really enjoyed about the story was the dialogue. Ernest Hemingway said Huck Finn is considered the first true American novel because it's written in colloquial English and vernacular. This is frequently a banned book because of that word. When you're an artist, you're writing what's a reflection of your time and hoping that if you write well enough that your work will live on for generations after. So it's funny to read the reviews that came out right away when the book came out. So this is from a newspaper, the Boston Transcript. It says, the Concord, Massachusetts Public Library Committee has decided to exclude Mark Twain's latest book from the library. One member of the committee says that while he does not wish to call it immoral, he thinks it contains but little humor and that of a very coarse type. He regards it as the veriest trash. Veriest. The librarian and other members of the committee entertained similar views, characterizing it as rough, coarse, and inelegant, dealing with a series of experiences not elevating, the whole book being more suited to the slums than to intelligent, respectable people. So said the Boston Transcript, March 17, 1885. A lot of those same arguments can be used today because of that word. And because since Huck Finn is a boy, some of the things that he does, you would not want a young boy to do. Nobody wants to read about a kid who does everything that he's supposed to and doesn't get into trouble. That's a boring book. We could like to think that we would like to see that in print, but nobody would ever read it. That's one of the reasons why I love Huckleberry Finn, because it is more like what boys are really like at that age. And to put Huck Finn in that decision where he's got to deal with what is he going to do about Jim, that's what elevates it into one of my 5 favorites. What's next? Boom! The Autobiography of Malcolm X. One of my all-time favorites. I am of the generation that even though I did not see Martin Luther King firsthand give his speech, I'm very well aware of who he is and what he did for black people as a whole and the civil rights movement. And I greatly appreciate what he did. I would not be able to do some of the things that I do if it were not for him. But As a young black man growing up in a country where you're getting used to seeing crimes happen against black people, I got a little tired of seeing, let's just pray, nonviolence is the way. We wanted to see some action. We were of a different generation where black people were not afraid to stand up for what they wanted and not be content playing in the background. So along comes Malcolm X. But I didn't hear a whole lot about him until uncles and cousins would slip me a little speech here, a little quote there, and then all of a sudden this Malcolm X guy started invading my brain. And then before I knew it, I was curious, who exactly is Malcolm X? Once I finally got to the book and I opened it up, I was hooked from the first paragraph. Chapter 1, Nightmare. When my mother was pregnant with me, she told me later, a party of hooded Ku Klux Klan riders galloped up to our home in Omaha, Nebraska one night. Surrounding the house, brandishing their shotguns and rifles, they shouted for my father to come out. My mother went to the front door and opened it. Standing where they could see her pregnant condition, she told them that she was alone with her 3 small children and that my father was away, preaching in Milwaukee. The Klansmen shouted threats and warnings at her that we better get out of town because the good Christian white people were not going to stand for my father's spreading trouble among the good Negroes of Omaha with the Back to Africa preachings of Marcus Garvey. That's the first paragraph. And from there, it only gets better. We follow him to Boston. We follow him to New York. We follow him to Mecca. We get to see him go to prison. We get to see how he got into prison. And once he gets into prison, how he educates himself. Over the years, I've actually spoken in a few prisons and juvenile facilities. And I actually had an inmate ask me one time, he said, "Aren't you afraid of speaking to guys like us? Why are you here? Aren't you afraid of all of this?" And I said, honestly, I'm not afraid of you guys. I said, because you remind me of many of my relatives. You know, I had uncles that went that way. I had cousins that could have gone that way. I have family members that didn't wear their halos, you know, you could say. And I connected with them in that regard because I didn't see them as a prisoner. I saw them as someone incarcerated, dealing with the situation that they had to contend with earlier in their life. A lot of the circumstances really come from seeing this man, Malcolm X, change his mindset from basically hating white people because of the way that he was treated to embracing all people through his religion of Islam. At the time when he came out as a black Muslim, the black Muslims was viewed as a group. They didn't look at it as Islam, and he made a point of educating people in that regard. He would correct them right away. It's not black Muslim, I am a Muslim. And he said this after returning from Mecca, having seen people paler than the whitest faces he had ever seen, praying right alongside him in Mecca. That changed his mindset. So it was really great for me to see somebody grow that way, but also see what created that mindset in the first place. Even though it's not a work of fiction, it's an autobiography, and probably the biggest thing when it comes to being a writer for an autobiography, in this case, the Autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. He lets Malcolm X tell his own story, and every piece of the story is as if you were there. You can hear the screams from Malcolm X as the lie is burning in his head. You can feel the isolation when he's in prison. You can feel the energy and rhythm as he's dancing in the clubs in Harlem. You can feel the angst and anguish when he's talking about the numbers runners and the guys like West Indian Archie. You could feel the connection between all of those things. They all came to life because Alex Haley got out of the way and let the story be told. Autobiography of Malcolm X was an awesome book, but it was also a great movie too with Denzel Washington, so make sure you check that out. So last but not least, let's see what's next. Boom. Invisible Man. Every single time I read it, I get something new. When kids ask me in school, what's my favorite book? This is the one that I pick. This was one of those books that I had heard people read. Some of my cousins had read it. I wasn't into it much at the time, so I didn't really get to read it until I was out of college and living in New York City. One of the reasons it's probably at the top of the 5 is because there's a universal theme which starts with the very first sentence. So I'll read that to you. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Boom. That right there hooked me. And that's the reason why I tell kids it's one of my favorite books, because often when you're a person of color, different gender, people don't see you. They don't see me, Charles R. Smith Jr. They see black man. They see bald black man. They see tall black man. They see everything but me. People are not going to see you as you, the person that your family and friends know you are. They're going to see you as a stereotype. So once we learn who's telling the story, then we learn where our protagonist is telling the story from. And that's the heart of the book, because he's telling it from underground, under a manhole. The whole book focuses on how he got there. Now, there's a variety of scenes that jump out in my head that I could, describe in detail, but probably the one that comes to mind the most is a scene where he's supposed to give a speech, and he shows up and he's looking all proper and everything, and he talks about giving his speech. He's so excited to give his speech, and it's to a group of white men, and they basically usher him in, leading him on the whole time, thinking he's going to give his speech. What ends up happening is he and a number of other young black men basically strip their shirts off, end up in a fight called a battle royal, something that I learned about when writing about the heavyweight boxing champ Jack Johnson. Battle royal, basically you take as many people as you can fit in a specified area, you let them fight, last man standing is win. That's the battle royal. And that was the case in this book. So imagine you show up, you're nice and dressed, you're thinking you're gonna give a speech, you're all ready to get some support from some people you think that are gonna support you, you're ready to give your speech. Instead, they say, all right, all you guys into the ring, take your shirts off, now you're gonna fight to the finish. What? Yup. And that's just a part of what makes the book unique, is those brutal, savage scenes like that show the existence that our protagonist had to deal with. There's a brusqueness, there's a muscularity, there's beauty, there's lyricism, there's savagery, there's brutality, there's empathy, there's sympathy, there's so much. And that's why I love the book, and that's why I've read it so many times. Not only does everybody in the book project what they see in our protagonist, we, the reader, do the same. And a book that can do that, that's priceless. That's my 5 favorite books. Were you surprised? Were you not surprised? Let me know in the comments below. I want to start a little dialogue to see how you think about this, because there's going to be plenty more favorite 5s coming. If you want to see more videos like this, click here. To subscribe, click right here. See you next time. Don't forget, feed the mind, challenge the body, inspire the spirit. Thanks.